and I'll turn my microphone on so everybody can hear me. This is Senate Bill 222.
Good morning, Senator Gray, members of the committee. Happy Budget Day. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Grant Bossy, Deputy Chief of Staff of the New Hampshire Senate, here to introduce Senate Bill 222 on behalf of the prime sponsor, Senator Jeb Bradley. 2 years ago, this legislature came together to create the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative. This innovative program, which passed the Senate 24-0, passed the House on a voice vote, leverages state and federal funds to help cities and towns expand their broadband coverage. Given the widespread support for the program, I need not spend time on the value of reliable broadband service to our local and state economies. SB 222 makes a small change to the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative to allow more projects to qualify. Currently, only areas with zero broadband coverage can apply for matching funds. SB 222 removes that restriction so that communities with some broadband coverage can undertake projects meant to bring broadband to more of their homes and businesses. I'll defer questions to the experts behind me today, but if you have any questions for Senator Bradley, I will make sure to get you an answer. Thank you for your consideration of Senate Bill 222.
Do the senators have any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can't find the email right now, but Senator Bradley did ask that the two people who were instrumental in requesting the bill from him, I think that is Rick and Matthew, is that right? Why don't you, both of you come up at the same time, and we'll try to make this even go quicker.
Okay.
And for the record, if you'd introduce yourself. Remember, we for all of you, we don't necessarily like to be read to because, you know, you've sent the testimony in. So what is the real point that you want us to take away? And if somebody has already did it, say, I agree with them, okay? The floor is yours.
Go ahead. Okay. Is this on? Okay. My name is Rick Highland. I'm from Albany, New Hampshire. I'm a semi-retired local businessman and a former Albany, New Hampshire selectman and planning board member. I am also the co-chair of the Carroll County Broadband Committee and also Albany's representative to the Carroll County Communications District Planning Committee formed under RSA 53G. With the support of 16 of the 19 towns in Carroll County participating, it looks promising that we may have the first communications district in New Hampshire. SB 222 very simply eliminates the limitation on municipal bonding for broadband that restricts their availability to unserved areas only. By doing this, SB 222 will expand the broadband bonding opportunities in municipalities and communications districts where commercial providers cannot invest due to financial constraints with regards to premises per mile. This might also allow municipalities and communications districts to partner with a commercial provider to expand broadband in their respective towns and districts. And that's the intent of the Carroll County Communications District, is to be able to facilitate and to partner with potential providers to be able to bring good broadband and speed to all the businesses and residents in Carroll County. And that's basically keeping it short and sweet. I did submit my testimony to all of you.
Yep.
And if you should have any questions after today, please contact me. All my contact information is on there. And if you have any
Matthew?
questions specific, I'd be happy to answer them today.
We're going to give the senators that opportunity here in just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Matthew.
Good morning. I'm Matthew Platch. I live in Wolfboro. I'm vice chair of the Carroll County Broadband Committee. I'm also, I serve on the Board of Commissioners for the Carroll County, I'm vice chair of the Board of Commissioners. SB 222 is very important. It creates a very important opportunity. A couple years ago, the legislature decided to allow municipalities to issue municipal bonds to support broadband. But there's a limitation on that, which it's limited to unserved areas. And the problem with limiting it to unserved areas is that any area that has, quote, broadband now is considered served. And the definition of broadband, which is set by the FCC, is archaic. It's a 25.3 standard, and that is just too slow. So you've essentially created an opportunity to do something that can't be done, because according to the most recent information filed by the providers at the FCC, everyone in New Hampshire can get broadband. But again, that's 25.3. State of the art in the cities is gigabit symmetrical. It's 1,000 by 1,000. We're starting to see that being deployed in rural areas in New Hampshire by Fidium and by the New Hampshire Electric Co-op. Except it's only a few places still. We need the tools to support this deployment. And one of those tools would be the ability to issue municipal bonds to do that. So we need to we want to sever the limitation. We want to get rid of that limitation and allow municipalities to issue bonds whenever needed to support broadband. And I just want to read this. It's in my written testimony, but this is what the FCC Chairwoman Rosenworcel said about 6 months ago. And it's a quote: "The 25.3 metric isn't just behind the times, it's a harmful one because it masks the extent to which low-income neighborhoods and rural communities are being left behind and left offline." And that's what we have in New Hampshire. We're basically, by limiting the ability to get grants and to issue bonds to unserved areas, you're leaving out a lot of people from from the opportunity to get state-of-the-art broadband. There's another thing I want to, there's another point that needs to be made. The Communications Act, Section 254, says that people living in rural areas are entitled to the same advanced telecommunications services, the same advanced services available to people in the cities. In the cities, you get 1,000 by 1,000, 2,000 by 2,000. It's fiber optic. In Carroll County, we're a vastly rural county, and there's other places in New Hampshire that are rural. We're not getting that. We need to make this happen. So I urge you to pass, to give this ought to pass vote.
Questions from the committee? I have questions. There's going to be people coming up behind you. They're going to say, you're allowing government, put the thumb on the scale. If somebody already has started introducing broadband into a community, now you're allowing the government to use its funding, its financing, to circumvent their system. How do you respond to that?
If someone comes into the community and offers a service that provides what the citizens need, then you're not going to get towns putting their thumb on the scale. So if we're talking about cable companies and they want to recapture the investment in copper, they're not going to be able to offer the speeds that are state-of-the-art over copper. What we see is Fidium and New Hampshire Electric Co-op right now deploying fiber optic. And wherever that happens, you're not going to see municipalities issuing bonds to extend that unless it's needed to go to areas on the outskirts of the community where it's too expensive to deploy. And what Fidium has told us is they're willing to spend $500 per passing.
So, again, playing devil's advocate to your own testimony, if it is not financially responsible for a company to run the cable out to my daughter's house, which sits in the middle of 17 acres, then why is it responsible for the city, the town, to go out and provide internet to her on the city's financials? I'm trying to get there. You're both up there, so you both can talk.
I don't see an issue with that in rural New Hampshire, because I don't believe you're gonna have people overbuilding each other, other than to get by someone to get to someone else. Okay, from the district standpoint, we were approached by one of the providers. That was the reason we looked at this legislation, because they asked about the revenue bond, where it's not gonna be put, the burden is not gonna be put on the property taxpayer, it's gonna be paid from revenues. And that was in relation to a possible partnership with that provider. And that is the, the basis behind our effort to change this.
Additional questions from the senators? Seeing none?
If I may just offer an additional comment on that. One of the limitation, we're setting up a communications district in Carroll County. 16 of the 19 towns are participating. And one of the limitations is that the district will not be able to issue general obligation bonds. However, the district would be able to issue revenue bonds if you open this up. And that is not paid for by taxpayers or by government. It's paid for by the proceeds of operating the network. And the district, I believe, would be happy to partner with any provider that's interested.
And that leads you to the question, if the revenues are not sufficient to pay the bond, then to me, it goes right back to the obligation of the community to pay for that. So with that, I'm going to ask if there's any other questions from the senators, and we'll call up the next people who want to testify.
Thank you.
And we'll be just as hard on them. Okay.
Thank you.
Mara? We'll sandwich you in here in the middle because you're the only one that signed up against.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. Good morning. For the record, my name is Maura Weston, and I'm here this morning on behalf of the New England Connectivity and Telecommunications Association. Our members in New Hampshire are Breezeline, Charter, and Comcast, and they are New Hampshire's leading broadband providers. Together, we serve approximately 485,000 customers and offer services to more than 650,000 locations in more than 185 communities. And I want to stress out of the gate that every single one of those locations has available to it speeds of at least a gigabyte per second. And there is no discrepancy between what is available in rural areas versus urban areas. This is the type of robust service being offered by cable providers as we speak. Those are state-of-the-art speeds. We respectfully submit testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 2222. As drafted, it strikes references to unserved areas. And Senator Gray, I think you'll recall from last year, your committee heard Senate Bill 247, which would have had a similar effect of allowing government-owned networks to deploy universally to compete head-on with the private sector using taxpayer funds. That, we believe, is risky, and that the risks are varied and many. And I know that it's an issue that this committee is familiar with, so I won't dwell on it. But what I will point out is that many of these municipal-owned networks, for example, Braintree in Braintree, Massachusetts, had to sell out recently to Comcast due to an inability to invest, stay competitive, and actually earn those revenues to actually make the network viable. Burlington, Vermont has been kind of the poster child of a failed network for now decades. They defaulted on their bonds, There was an eventual sale to a private company. Here in New Hampshire, Fast Roads provides an example where they received over $40 million in taxpayer funds to build that network. It ended up being subsidized by the Monadnock Development Corporation for some time, and then sold for pennies on the dollar to a private entity. So long-term repayment obligations really create uncertainty, especially in an environment where we have very fast-paced technology. Not just the improvements to technology, but what it takes for us to maintain our networks in the event of storms, outages, et cetera. So we believe that bonding for all is not a wise approach. It is my understanding from chatting with Senator Bradley that one of the concerns that the proponents would like to address is under the BMGI program, the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative program, there is a requirement that a provider contribute 25% of the total cost of a project, and that there's a question being asked about whether or not someone may come forward to partner given that 25% contribution to the total cost of the project. So, you know, we're all about partnerships between providers and municipalities. So we would actually suggest a more surgical approach to addressing concerns raised by particularly rural towns, and perhaps taking a look at that 25% match requirement and creating a waiver process for that match requirement. We believe that that avoids uncertainty of the ballot process, the cost of bond issuance, the uncertainty of ownership requirements that could result with a failed municipally owned and operated network. In fact, you know, I'll point to the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. We anticipate, New Hampshire anticipates, receiving a minimum of $100 million from BEAD, likely $200 million for the purposes of funding more broadband planning, deployment, and adoption programs. And BEAD itself contains within it a waiver of that 25% match requirement. And so we think sort of a surgical fix under BMGI, which is 12061 of the New Hampshire RSAs, to create a waiver process for that match requirement would really remove any barriers, any existing barriers to those public-private partnerships that could continue to serve our most rural communities very, very well. So I'll just wrap up by saying that we'd really like to work with the sponsors and the stakeholders on an amendment to see if we can come up with a tweak to New Hampshire law that would be surgical and precise, solving for certain questions without opening up the risks and the potential very serious adverse consequences to taxpayer-funded competition with taxpayer revenues through bonding. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may
Questions
have.
from committee members? My turn again. All right.
All right.
I have had people sit in my office and tell me that, well, gee, the stuff that we're doing, when another company comes in and says, okay, we're going to supply to these customers, that they want the ability to pick up other customers along the way because the cable goes by their house. You know, it seems like the companies are fighting each other tremendously, and the people who are losing are the consumers and not the others.
So I don't disagree with your statement that it's the constituents who are losing in that situation. I will say that cable has been a very strong advocate for public-private partnerships under the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative program. That's a different program than the BCP that moved forward from BEA. They did round 1 and round 2 of BCP. BMGI really allows for a provider and a municipality to sit down together to determine where there are gaps in coverage and to come up with a plan that's endorsed by the municipality to serve anyone who's unserved and to provide all of their residents with state-of-the-art, gig service. So we're big proponents of BMGI, and I think tweaking BMGI to allow for a waiver, that 25% match, really gives every rural community the chance to partner and make sure that everyone, every end user has access to this state-of-the-art technology.
Additional questions? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I appreciate
Ms.
it.
Heck? There she is. She was hiding back there.
Good morning, Chairman Gray and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Catherine Heck from the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we're here to voice our strong support for Senate Bill 222. For the last several years, starting in 2018, the state has made a huge commitment to keep adding legislation that's enabling so that municipalities and providers can continue to serve New Hampshire residents and businesses with broadband and broadband coverage. Senate Bill 222, I believe, is another tool in that financial toolbox to continue that build out to address middle and last mile broadband service where perhaps, to where you heard testimony, service is just not available. We have unprecedented levels of federal funding that have come in, as you've heard. ARPA and IIJA have both, and several other grants, have lifted the restrictions so that private companies can, in fact, apply for the funds. So to the Broadband Matching Fund Initiative, private companies can apply and obtain those funds because we do recognize there is a massive cost to build out in certain areas. And of course, we talk about the mapping and using the FCC maps. The state of New Hampshire has been a leader nationwide in bringing broadband to its constituents. Right now, I believe there's $40 million deployed up north, and they're hanging 20 miles of broadband a week, according to BEA. And with this mapping project they're undertaking, it's going to be done at the granular level so they can understand who is in fact served and unserved in New Hampshire, and that's being done by BEA and their broadband initiative. So combined with the mapping project, this bill and all the other legislation that you have enabled, we believe this is another tool to bring this to our residents and businesses so we can continue to have a strong economy as it is deemed almost essential infrastructure now. And I did want to point out that this utility, like many others, municipalities run successful water and sewer utilities nationwide, including in New Hampshire. We run some telephones. We run broadband all over, and there's some success stories that we can hear about. So I did want to point out that there are successful utilities being run. We run solar and power through municipal government all over this country. So there are success stories to be taken away as well from communities that do this very, very well to serve their residents, and there is no risk to the taxpayer. And when you add the P3 model, or the public-private partnership model, that is, again, just one more tool. And I know communities are really excited about this potential opportunity where they know that part of their community, well, it shows that 100% served is really closer to 75% served, and they're not necessarily very rural communities. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? I have some.
Yes, sir.
People would tell me that it is irresponsible for a community to go out and spend thousands, if not more, dollars to serve a single customer, which their expectation of getting paid back is, in the $20 a month range or whatever, if I'm only doing the broadband part of this. How long would these bonds be? So speak to the financial issues, if you would, please.
Sure. So just like water and sewer, when we build out any sort of infrastructure, there's certainly at any one point in time the people who are served and the people who are not served. The revenue bonds could be paid for by users, so therefore the other people in the district would not necessarily have to pay, more like a water district, a village district, for example. There's several ways that this could be structured so that the risk only falls on those who are served by the particular service. In addition, something like ARPA the American Rescue Plan Act, actually encouraged municipalities, local municipalities, and many have in New Hampshire, to pay for fiber to the premise for individual users who did not have access. So there was a huge federal push to use federal dollars, which are also our tax dollars, to get that because of the digital inequity that exists. So they weren't able to school at home during remote learning or work at home and keep the economy going. So I think it's a value-based decision, and I think the community votes on these bonds, and they can decide if it is advantageous for itself and the residents contained within to take on that debt.
How long do you think these bonds are going to be for? 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds?
Probably 10 to 20-year bonds is my estimation. I haven't seen any go out to 30.
That leads into my next question. Now, if I look back 10 or 20 years in the internet industry, certainly 20 years ago, I'm not getting probably even 25.3, you know, as they said, and certainly I don't need a gig up and a gig down to be able to stream. I mean, I guess my problem is that looking at it financially, if the system is still not going to be state of the art that I need at halfway through the bond, then again, it seems like it's financially irresponsible to have this bond when, say, low Earth orbit satellites or whatever are out there and that technology is going to be able to use, or you know, some kind of a booster for cable, or for I should say that.
So I definitely understand your point from a fiscal and financial perspective. I heard a very interesting tax policy analyst quote that the reason why telecoms, back when telephone was issued, they got monopolies to serve 100% of all residents, and in exchange they were given a monopoly to do so. And as we know, telephony and copper is outdated and becoming more outdated by the day. We have moved away from that monopoly model, and now we rely on, of course, private industry to do this. And of course, it makes sense from their perspective to serve density, right? Density is where the money would be, but that still leaves our residents without. So if the FCC and the federal government and the state of New Hampshire are really focused on making sure that everybody has digital equity, my hope from a policy standpoint would that they would continue to give us tools to upgrade these services moving forward, to your point, sir, so that we can always be competitive, because our most rural person deserves to have a great work-at-home job just as somebody living in a more metropolitan area here in New Hampshire, a more city environment. That's the kind of economy that we can foster and build, and I believe the state is working on that commitment, and a bill like this, again, is just another financial tool in the toolbox.
I guess we'll take some of this conversation offline because I'm probably more interested than other people.
Thank you.
But it's about the equity issues and stuff. Seeing no other comments or questions, the last one on my list is David from New Hampshire Co-op.
Didn't sign up to support. I didn't sign up to speak.
Oh, you didn't sign up to speak. All right.
Just an interested observer.
If you'd check the list, see if anybody else has signed up. Okay. We'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 222, and as soon as our assistant is ready, we will open the hearing. There's nobody on it. All right. Just hand it to me anyway. Thank you. We'll open the hearing on excuse me, Senate Bill 223, and introduce the prime sponsor, Senator Avard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard. I'm the prime sponsor of SB 223 relative to the supervisor of the checklists. This came in behalf of meetings with the Secretary of State and a number of my constituents who wanted a little bit more of accountability on the supervisor of the checklists. And so on their behalf, I've drafted this bill. It basically changes the terms of the supervisor of the checklist to 3 years, and it requires the supervisor of the checklist to use information from the National Change of Address database to verify the corrections to the voter checklist. And from what I understand, the second part of that is probably already established in law and just waiting to be utilized. But in the bill, you'll see where the supervisor of the checklist is changed from 6 years to 3 years. And on line 3, where it says every, held in every, an even number, I'm sorry, that might need a committee amendment to change it to like a staggered term. And also, in the particular bill, those that have already been elected, that needs to be grandfathered in so that the new electees would be changed to every 3 years on a staggered basis. That's basically the essence of it. Right now, there's a 6-year, and some of my constituents just feel as though that there needs to be a little bit more of accountability and opportunity for others, especially if somebody's not doing a good job with it. And so they had asked for this to be put in. And I also have a committee amendment as well, Mr. Chairman, if I could pass that on to you. Not a committee amendment, just an amendment, which basically adds a study to the bill relative to the supervisor's checklist and establishing a committee to study possible oversight and supervision of the checklist. And I think the important parts, investigate ways, on line 17, investigate ways in which oversight of the supervisor of the checklist might be provided, study some possible supports for the supervisor of the checklist, and investigate penalties for supervisor of the checklist that are not compliant with state law. And that's basically the essence of the study. And so on behalf of my constituents, I offer this bill.
All right. As you pointed out, there will be several changes needed that every even number year is what the bill says, and the next line it says 3 years, so that's not going to work. And you would have the people elected in 22 that would need to be dealt with, which is what the rest of that first paragraph deals with. And I think that after you, since there's nobody else signed up, I'm going to ask Deputy Secretary of State to come up and answer a few questions. Is there anyone who has any questions for Senator Avard?
Thank you,
Seeing
Mr.
none,
Chair.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Deputy.
Good morning, Mr. Chair,
Good morning.
honorable members. Good to see you. Erin Hennessy, Deputy Secretary of State.
You and I had a conversation about this bill yesterday, and the efforts right now that are ongoing to actually do checking the NCOA database for changes of address in the postal system. If you would fill in the committee, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So back in 2021, legislation passed that required our office to do the NCOA check, which is the National Change of Address database. And it required us to do that in this fiscal year at least once. So we are in the process of getting that information completed. It's not an easy process to do, especially with our old registration system. Our plan is we will get that done before the end of this fiscal year, the end of June. And our hope is that with our new statewide voter registration system, that we will be able to do that more frequently than just once a year. So we're supportive of the idea behind this. I don't know that we need legislation to require that, since it's already in law that we have to do it anyways, at least once annually. The other piece of the bill, other than the amendment that I have, is moving from 6 to 3-year terms. It might bring more people to run for the office of supervisor of the checklist, especially in areas where they might have a hard time finding people to run for office. So we're supportive of the ideas in this bill.
Okay, additional questions? Is there anybody in the audience that didn't get to speak that wants to speak? I'm not seeing any. We'll close the public hearing, and we'll open the next one just as soon as we are ready. I didn't spell Henderson's name all the way out.
Okay, I got it, thank you.
All right, we'll open the public hearing on Senate Bill 224 and ask the prime sponsor to introduce the bill and herself.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, for the record, I am Senator Rebecca Perkins Quokka, representing Senate District 21, the city of Portsmouth, and several seacoast communities. SB 224 does two things, and those two things can be used separately or together by municipalities. The first thing that the bill does is it is enabling legislation which would allow our municipalities to require, as part of any new construction, income-restricted housing units. This is a local option, and inside the language in Section 1, it includes language adopted by Portsmouth and Amherst, among others, which allows our planning board to give flexibility under the ordinance to certain projects. This is because if a municipality is to include income-restricted units as a requirement in a housing project, it does actually affect the economics of the housing project because they're not able to charge market rent for those units. And so there's sort of an economic gap, and we want to make sure that these projects are successful, even if required. And so we needed to include some flexibility in order to allow the towns and cities to sort of make compensatory measures and make sure these housing projects come to the table. So in addition to that, there's some language in Section 1 that I am working with a few parties on, and that's lines 9 through 11, starts inclusionary zoning ordinances that require. I think we want to restate this in a little bit more plain English, but the intent is that where municipalities want to adopt this ordinance, that they again sort of take into consideration in the standards in the zoning, for example, the density standards, the economics of this type of project. And so we're working on that. And then another piece that I'd just like to raise now and take feedback on from my fellow senators or from members of the audience is that the bill might benefit from some limitations. So, for example, we could enable municipalities to require income-restricted units in projects of a certain size, for example, a floor of 25 or 30 units. And we also could include sort of a maximum percentage of income-restricted units. For example, in Portsmouth's voluntary ordinance, that percentage is 20%. So I'd welcome feedback on those points. In the second part of the bill, Section 2, basically this is just making improvements to an existing program under statute, which allows a local tax credit. The improvements are intended to reflect, again, sort of our current realities in the housing market, to allow projects to qualify with only a minimum of 20% as opposed to 1/3 of housing units that are permanently affordable. And that affordability threshold would be 100% of area median income as opposed to 80%, reflecting that, unfortunately, workforce housing challenge is continuing to expand and enabling municipalities to have a longer tax credit to reflect the lifetime of the projects if they so choose. And so, again, these two parts are intended to be able to be used together or separately, but they are policy tools that our municipalities would have in order to incentivize not only housing development, but making sure we're maintaining a diversity of housing supply, which on the seacoast is an increasing problem, not only to our economy and to our multi-generational society, but also to, you know, sort of our diversity and our richness of our civic culture. So, again, Chair, I'm working with a group on a couple language changes here, but I would be more than happy to take any questions.
Questions? I have some.
I'm sure you do.
14 are demonstrated, okay? I don't know that demonstrated is defined anywhere. And someone suggested the words, instead of demonstrated, which in the opinion of would be, at least you'd have to consider them. I also want to talk about the percentages down, especially down in 24, where it's 100% of the median. If I look at Durham, okay, that may be $125,000 down in Durham, the median income. But if I look at Farmington, if I look at other communities, you know, especially in northern New Hampshire, that may be considerably less.
True.
So I think that that's a difficult thing, especially when you're trying to apply this across the state. You said you're looking at it, so that may be something else. And then on line 27, 28, the period of time. People have come to me and said, if I'm not going to get benefits to the city through taxation for these for a period of 10 years and now, in this case, a period of 25 years, then don't I just shift the burden to providing schooling, providing municipal services, to providing, so again, those are just comments, and I'm going to allow you to comment on any of my comments.
Sure. So I think in terms of your first comment, I'm definitely open to a language change there, and we'll think about in the opinion of. I think the intent, as it was, you know, it would be that local ordinances could draft this in a way that made sense. But in Portsmouth, for example, it was sort of a sharing of some limited financial information by the applicant, which again is a choice of the applicant if they wish to apply under these ordinances. As to the 100%, we'll take a look at that too. It's an ongoing conversation. Workforce housing is currently defined as housing that's affordable to folks in the bracket of 60 to 100% of area median income, but in some areas we are seeing that expansion to 120% for the exact reason you're talking about, to make sure that we're capturing the people that really are having trouble finding housing, which include a growing income range. And then on 25 years, yes, it's a policy choice, you know, I mean, but I think that our job at the state is to make sure we are giving our towns and cities appropriate tools. They are very different. You know, Portsmouth is different than a rural town north of Farmington. And if Portsmouth is struggling to maintain its diversity, which I believe is a problem that will just continue to expand across our state and our cities, then I think we at the state need to consider how we can sort of support those policy choices that they make individually. But
Additional questions?
Thank you for your comments.
Seeing none, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. Deputy Mayor Portsmouth. Or Assistant Mayor, I guess it says.
All in the same. Thank you so
All
much, Senator, and thank you, committee. My name is Joanna Kelly, native of New Hampshire, small business owner, and representing the city of Portsmouth as deputy mayor. We are speaking today, I am speaking today to support SB 224 currently as written, understanding that there may be some adjustments to this proposed legislation.
If you just suspend for a second, if there's additional ones of those,
There are.
yeah, okay.
On the table, Senator.
I apologize.
You're fine.
Oh, there's an amendment to Senate Bill 158 that we're putting up on the table. So I just, because of the confusion going on, I didn't want any of your testimony to get lost, so.
Nope. That's
All right.
fine. Thank you so much.
Back to you. Thank you.
In Portsmouth, we've adopted legislative principles that we follow as a city council. This bill supports several of those, including supports the policy to create affordable housing as well as incentives for construction of affordable housing and opposes any policies that block affordable housing. In Portsmouth, from 2015 to last year, there were 1,729 new dwelling units added to the city. If the city had been able to require 20% of those units be affordable, 344 affordable units would have been brought online. We currently have workforce incentives in two of our character districts, our North End and our West End. The zoning ordinance permits incentives for construction of workforce housing or community space. What we struggle with is that we find most often, as you'd find statewide, that most developers decide to choose community space. And we know that those community spaces end up being more walkways, more hardscape, less the incentive that we're looking to drive. We also have incentives for bonus densities in our workforce housing in our gateway. Over the last several years, we've added 93 workforce units. Only 29 of them have been through private development, and 64 have been through nonprofit relationships in development of Griffin's Place. We've approved construction of 19 more units that should be constructed ideally between 23 and 24. The goal here today is several things. To touch on the fact that we know we're in a housing crisis here in New Hampshire, and to do all that we can as policymakers to help our citizens and residents, including requiring developers to create some affordable housing. Also, my goal and one of my jobs is also to advocate for local authority, local zoning, and to protect some of these decisions on a local level. Bringing this to allow certain municipalities, and we know with all legislation that some municipalities will not find that they need to bring this policy on. But here on the Seacoast, there on the Seacoast, we know that we are in a big housing crisis, and we're looking for state support to have legislation so that we can create policies that make Portsmouth and the Seacoast more accessible in the state to residents, and to be able to keep people here. So I thank you so much for allowing me to testify today. Any questions?
All right. Questions? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. Is there a reason why Portsmouth hasn't been able to adopt this policy in the local level?
So currently, right now, as my understanding is there's no RSA that allows us to require it. So therefore, we can't adopt a policy that statewide doesn't exist. We do, like I said, have two incentives that allow for either workforce housing or community space, and we've seen that most developers end up going for the community space aspect. So right now what we're looking to do is, to some degree, not give them the option and be able to require the workforce housing percentage.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. So
Thank you so
very
much, committee, for your time.
Next on the list, Nola. GSOP. Looks like the last name is Katusimei. I wasn't even
got
going
it.
to try to pronounce that.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and thank you the committee for the opportunity to speak. For the record, my name is Viola Katsime, and I'm here representing.
Oh, that's a V. Okay.
My handwriting
like
is
an N.
terrible, so
I'm sorry.
I apologize. I'm here representing the Grind State Organizing Project. We are a grassroots organization that's based in Manchester, and the goal is to bring people together to work towards more social justice issues. And we're here to express our support for SB 224. We work on housing issues ranging from tenant organizing to advocating and organizing to increase affordable housing in Manchester, Nashua, the Souhegan Valley, as well as the Upper Valley. We are here again because we know the state of crisis that we're in regarding housing. no one here, I think all of us here are very familiar with the fact that our vacancy rate is around 0.4%. And in a healthy market, we should be around 4 to 5%. In Manchester particularly, we are short of 2,000 units. And statewide, that number is much higher, about 20,000 affordable units that we need to address our housing shortage that we are facing in the state. And this information can be found from the New Hampshire Housing Report of last year. I work with tenants, again, like I mentioned, in Manchester, Nashua, Milford, Upper Valley, and we've been talking about inclusionary zoning as a way to really address this issue about affordable housing. And what we are encountering, for instance, in Manchester and Milford is that those cities cannot implement inclusionary zoning. We've been told that there's no state law that would require that, and if we feel like this is an opportunity for municipalities to actually take that action further. We know that this tool itself will not be enough to close that gap that we need for affordable housing, but it does get us closer to what we're aiming for. And so by passing this law, it would help reduce that barrier that municipalities, Manchester is considerably looking at this policy. We've been talking to aldermen, and we're talking to the planning board as a way to really bring this forward. But if this is passed, this gives us an opportunity to move forward and pass inclusionary zoning in Manchester. So I hope you will consider passing this. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Senator, do you have any questions? I'm good too. Thank you very
Thank
much
you
for
very
your
much.
testimony. And Jessica.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica, or good morning. My name is Jessica Margison, and although I am with Granite State Organizing Project and I am on the Housing Commission in Manchester, and I have a tenant clinic every Wednesday from 1 to 4, I am here to speak on my own. What 224 would mean to our communities, this is not a requirement that it would make the cities, it is an option for them. And in our town of Manchester, we recently had, in the past year, a property on Depot and Auburn Street. It made the news a little bit. They utilized the 79E tax credit, but they were not willing to put any affordable housing in. That property takes up a whole city corner. It is right next to a grocery store. It's about 100 feet from a main bus stop. It would have been very important for those at low income, elderly, or disabled to have an opportunity to live near such resources like that. They did utilize the 79E tax break, and again, we're unwilling to offer anything for affordable. And in Manchester, the City Commission has put together a little cheat sheet basically for our aldermen in our city to be able to look at what these numbers actually mean in real life. Those at 30% AMI, they're only really qualifying for $525 a month in rent. So any tool we can give our cities to increase housing for the majority that are not income qualifying, that are integral parts of our community, is important. And I just want to remind you, it doesn't enforce it. It gives the cities an option. Thank you.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. That's the last one I have on this copy of the list. All right, you're on the second one? Yeah. Or you can bring the copy of the second one up with you when you come.
I will take it.
All right. While she's getting ready, you can sit down and introduce yourself.
All right. My name is Bob Quinn. I am the CEO of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors. We didn't sign in either in support or oppose the bill, and I have had several conversations so far with Senator Perkins Coca about the language, and I know that an amendment may be coming. The second part of the bill, Section 2, we would support in concept. It's important to note that right now, the median income in New Hampshire cannot afford the median sale price of a single-family home of $415,000. So the need to encourage and incentivize developers to create more affordable housing is important in the state and something that we would certainly support. Our issue is really in this first section. First, it does require the definition of economic viability and seems to give that authority to the city or the planning board to decide what is economically viable for a developer. We would certainly have some concerns about that. At the very least, would want to see a definition of what that entails. The second piece to keep in mind is Currently, inclusionary zoning, as its definition, provides a voluntary incentive or benefit to the property owner in order to induce them to create housing which is more available and below market rates. This is now going to shift it. So now a municipality can require that any developer has to provide affordable units within any structure. Then the town gets to decide whether or not creates an economic viability issue or not. In the past, it has always been a balance between the developer and the town, as the town's trying to induce and provide incentives to that individual to create more of these units. And we think that's more appropriate. But again, we are in conversations with Senator Quokka to see if there's some way to improve the bill. So with that, I would end my testimony.
Okay. Questions? I have a question. Okay. When I read lines 19 through 28, okay, I was thinking of the median income within the community because that would seem to make more sense to me. But it's not worded that way, and it could be the median income in the state. And then going back to Durham, that if I'm required to make 20% of my housing equal to the median income of the state, then they're not going to be real happy. And if I go to, you know, a smaller community up north where the median income is low, then it's not going to provide any housing to anybody that they can afford. Comments on that?
So as the senator pointed out, Section 1 and Section 2 are almost standalone. So the Section 2 has to do with housing opportunity zones, which a community can enact or choose not to enact as an incentive to entice developers into creating more affordable homes. The first section would apply to all areas of the community. So, you know, that's clearly the area that we would be concerned, and I think would speak to your concern as well.
Am I, by implementing this, making people travel longer distances like they do now to be able to earn an income in one community and afford to live in another community?
I think overall, there's one thing that certainly we all agree on, and that is the need for more housing for all incomes, whether or not that's low income or, as we often refer to it, as the missing middle, those folks who are very much middle class, middle income, who cannot find currently housing within a reasonable distance of where they're working. And that issue is incumbent upon municipalities in the state to ensure and entice them. And I do think Section 2 starts to get to that and is a help, and would look forward to working with the senator to see if we can tighten up some language in Section 1 to see if that's feasible or not. We do generally support, though, it should be a negotiation between a developer and a municipality. The municipality should not have carte blanche ability to sort of mandate. If they mandated 25% of all units in every complex has to be affordable or workforce housing or below market housing, it could make all of those developments no longer economically viable, and therefore you're not going to get housing for anyone in those communities, and that's a concern of ours.
Okay, that's the questions I have. Senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I didn't generate any other people that are out there haven't gotten to speak yet. So we'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 224. And Senator Murphy will open the hearing as soon as our assistant is ready. Okay. There you go. And so we got our red light here.
Open the hearing on Senate Bill 158. Recognize prime sponsor, Senator Gray.
Thank you very much. My name is James Gray. I represent Senate District 6, which starts up in Belknap County and around the Alton area, and it goes down Route 11 towards Rochester. Today, I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 158. There's a couple of different reasons for this bill. Right now, even in the last election, there are voters who are disenfranchised because when they vote by absentee ballot, they don't fill out the affidavit correctly. So, and there's also voters who would like to see the signature verification, which was preempted by the court system, reinstituted. And those two can come together in this bill. That what the court decision said is that we will not be able to check the signatures on the affidavit and on the application until we have a process where they can have a method of correcting a mistake, and that training is provided for the people who are going to be doing the checking. Well, this addresses the first one, that if the outer envelope is only used as a mailing device, a place to put the stamps and a place to put the address, which in fact that's what it really is, that the affidavit will be there for the clerk, for the supervisor, for the moderator, for anyone who's authorized to look at it, to be able to look at the signatures and make sure. Generally what happens in elections, if you go back, is that the affidavit doesn't get signed at all, okay? And certainly that is something that's very noticeable, and by the rest of the information that was provided for these people. Certainly if I am trying to vote right at City Hall, before the person leaves, you'll be able to look at that signature on the affidavit and make sure that everything is fine. It's only those individuals that would mail them in where there more than likely would be a problem that we could satisfy right now, because the court order for checking the signatures against the application is still in effect. But if there is no signature there, we do use that as a reason to reject the ballot. So that would allow us to do that. The Secretary of State's office, under the previous secretary, has assured me that he is ready and willing to provide training in checking those signatures and a system to make sure that it happens properly, which would then allow us to go back to the court and get him to lift the order, not allowing us to do that. So what you have in front of you and the amendment deals with a particular section on page 3 of the original bill, around line 19, where it talks about opening the outer envelope, and the words in the bill say, and attach the application, attach thereto the application. And that's not, we don't want them attaching the application to the outer envelope. We want them attaching it to the affidavit envelope, which this amendment makes clear. We also had one other request from the Clerks Association via the Secretary of State. I should say, I believe it was from the Clerks Association, and that was to add printed name along with signature and voter address on the affidavit to make it easier for them to pair up the applications with the affidavit envelopes. I'm happy to do that for them. And certainly, this bill is looking towards integrity, that some of the pushback that I've gotten from various people in municipalities is we get so many of these things in the last few days before a presidential election. Well, and they don't want to do it. Well, my opinion is by not doing this, you have the possibility of disenfranchising a voter who has taken the time to request an absentee ballot, to fill out that ballot, and to send it back in and makes a small mistake by either not signing or doing something with that affidavit that a clerk could be identified. And you also, by not having the signature requirement, being able to look at that, then we have the possibility that something that we could tell just by looking at the affidavit and the request for the absentee ballot, that a voter who is not eligible to vote, or a person who is not eligible to vote, could cast a ballot. So I ask for your kind consideration, and we'll work at this and continue on. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this is existing law, regardless of the outcome of Senate Bill 158, but it says on line 17, I am unable to vote in person due to disability. Should that be changed to physical disability?
I think that if you go back into the Constitution, the section there, I think that those words were chosen back then because of that the Constitution says disability. But I can check on that for you and get back to you.
No one else is signed up to speak currently. There are two others who've signed up in support. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on Senate Bill 158? Seeing none, I close the hearing.
I know that Senator Perkins Quokka's schedule says she was going to be in and out this morning. Senator Susi did notify us that if we were going to exec on something, especially if it was going to go on the consent calendar, that she would be interested in coming back over for that. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recess according to that clock till 20 after, which is a little over 10 minutes. And then we'll come back and we'll try to go into executive session with as many people as we have at that time. So with that, we are in recess for 11 minutes. I will turn on the mic. For Senate Bill 158 is the one, and since it's mine, you know,
Chairman's privilege.
I did put in amendment 2023-0511S. And if you look at the amendment, the changes were line 25, we added printed name in there at the request of the Secretary of State. That's on the amendment. And then over on the second page of the amendment, we made it clear that it is the application is attached to the affidavit envelope and not the outer envelope. Okay. With that, is there anyone else that would like to speak to Senate Bill 158?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there was some conversation, hopefully off the record, but I'll put it on the record. And this is existing law, so this isn't any criticism or anything to do with Senate Bill 158. But if you look at the amendment that Senator Gray has provided us, if you look at line 17, it says due to disability. I'm unable to vote in person due to disability. I always understood Part 1, Article 11 does say physical disability, and perhaps that's the intended language, but would there be any appetite to change that to say physical disability? Now, on line 27, it also says disability, but I don't think that that's the same meaning. I know it's the same word, but that's a person assisting someone with a disability. So you can be assisting someone who doesn't necessarily have a physical disability. So I don't think that that's necessarily the same meaning, but I think for the purpose of absentee ballot purposes, maybe on line 17, would there be any appetite to add the word physical to that section while it's right in front of us?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, my only concern with that would be someone who has an emotional disability. It may or may not manifest physical symptoms, but they could have paranoia or some nervous condition that is classified as a disability but wouldn't be necessarily physical.
All right.
That's my only
What I believe,
concern.
and if we want to postpone action on this until afterward, what I believe is this is the section that pulls from the law that says, you know, what you can get an absentee ballot for, and then puts this into the affidavit language. And I believe that part of the law that they pull from explains it better than the few words we're trying to put here. And if it doesn't, Senator, I'll join with you in a floor amendment to do something, you know, with this at that time.
Yeah, and again, that
Incorporated into another
my
bill.
issue I raised is the current concern, that concerns under existing law.
Yeah.
So the policies, the other policy consideration of the Senate Bill 158, you know, should stand alone. I don't want to muddy this bill up by adding my own stuff to it by that, if you know what I mean. So that can be a standalone bill or a floor amendment.
And possibly we can look at Senator Soucy's bill for making any changes there also.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, with that,
I just want to clarify one thing. I thought I heard you mention an amendment. I don't have one.
it was put on your table.
Thank you. Wow, thank you. All right. Okay.
They
Probably
were
my
hiding it from,
shuffling.
they were
somewhere.
hiding it from you, I guess. Okay.
Okay, thank
And
you
like I
very
said, the only difference that I asked them to put into the amendment was those two items, the printed name,
Okay.
and then
Add to the
the way it was before, attached there too, and they left in there too. I was gonna take that out, but the drafters do what the drafters do. You know, I are an engineer. I'm not noted for my English nor my spelling.
It's like me. I stay away from the math.
And so that makes it clear that they're attaching it to the affidavit envelope. So with that, I will move ought to pass on Senate Bill 158. And if I get a second,
I'll give it a second.
I'll also move Senate Amendment 2023-0511S. And do I have a
Second.
second on the amendment? Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, we're voting on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's 5-0. And the bill as amended now, is any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we can put it on consent if you choose. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And since it's mine, I'm gonna assign it to me. Okay. Bills that we heard today, is there anyone that think that the broadband one, people on both sides are wondering what my questions were all about, so they're off trying to figure that out. I've told them that in my opinion, that what they've constructed is a win-lose, and I want them to see if they can find a win-win. So if, without objection, we'll let that one go for a while. The next one that I have on the list is Senate Bill 223. Because of the problems that are in the bill as it was drafted, it's got to change. The amendment creates a committee to study, but that doesn't do any more than what we would do if we re-referred the bill to ourselves. Would give us all those same options, and we would keep it and couldn't get anybody we want. With the Secretary of State talking about the NCOA and that they're not even going to be able to NCOA their database until the summertime because they're trying to look for vendors and other things that would not make sense for us to make changes there when we may learn things that we would want to put into that. So if I had my druthers, I would probably say re-refer as a motion. We have a motion to re-refer. I'll second it. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Move consent.
And we have a motion to go to consent. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And it's on consent. And is there anybody who wants to volunteer? I will take this one out too then.
Yeah, right.
Hey,
Mr. Chairman, are any of these, oh yeah, they're all going on to, we're not doing a supplement, they're all going on to the next calendar.
Yep, because we're not having,
Yep.
okay, so, and Senator Perkins Quokka had the last bill, and she is looking at language for Section 1 and possibly Section 2. So now we're back to the bills that we've previously heard. Is there anyone who wants to call one out for making a motion?
Chairman, before you move on, I just wanted to ask the committee if there were any further comments on 224 before I go busy myself with an amendment, if anyone else had any thoughts.
The things that I talked about during the hearing,
Yep.
certainly, the problem in this, and maybe the one part that you didn't hear is, when I read the second section about the percentages and the median income, I looked at it as the median income for the community and not the median income for the state,
Right.
which I believe it could be read either way.
Okay.
And that if I'm talking about the median income from the state, I think it has less use in various communities But if it's the median income for the community, then I build completely different housing in Farmington than I do in Durham.
Yep.
And I may have to travel a lot further to be able to afford to work in, a food industry, service industry, or something else in Durham if I do it that way. So I think that's a monumental task to try to write this so that it's a one bill fits all. And I think you were here when I talked about the 25%, that if I'm forgiving taxes on either the total value or the incremental value of the property, which would be the building less of the land probably in a lot of these cases, that other things like police coverage, fire coverage, could be affected. So those are my comments. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the two questions. One, there was testimony about development in Manchester that would have fallen under the 79E provisions. I probably should have asked the witness this question, but maybe they would have known. Would that development fell under 79E:4-C? Meaning, would they have been eligible for the tax exemption of the assessment relief? Because I understood the testimony that that developer was refusing to put in low-income or low-income housing into that development. So I wasn't clear if that's the case, they're not going to get the tax break, but they're still making a development. It's still increasing the housing supply, which hopefully the simple supply and demand argument would work. But I just wasn't clear on that. Then the other.
Okay, I can look into that.
The other part that I kind of look at is, and I can just see from what I've seen in the southern New Hampshire area, is when they either grant variances or change of uses, or if there's changes to the local zoning, one of the selling points is that you have either undeveloped land, and if you develop it, there'll be more revenue, tax revenue for property taxes, and that will hopefully, doesn't always happen, but hopefully that would lower the property tax rate. But if you're going to now allow for a significant amount of property tax relief for the developer, which from the developer perspective, I get it. You're trying to incentivize them to do something, and it would make sense to do that. But at the same time, I think at the local level, you may have more of the grassroots opposition to these developments, these changes, because of the tax relief. Because then their real estate taxes or property taxes won't go down.
Yeah, and
So-
and just to clarify, for both comments in section 2, I mean, it is an optional program. I mean, a town or city can choose to, enact this local tax credit or not. You don't have to do that in order to enact the ordinance under section 1. And the program under number 2, it is an existing option. I'm just proposing some tweaks to it. So I think all those concerns you're raising are very valid, and they're a policy decision in my mind. And so I don't necessarily think we should make that decision at this level. I think we should let the towns and cities make a decision about whether they want to incentivize housing to that degree or not. Yeah.
But
Done.
what is stopping the town or city right now from adopting this exact language?
Nothing. I'm just broadening it, basically.
I would probably try to qualify that because 79E is one of the vehicles you're going to use, and 79E only authorizes you to use certain days, certain amount of time, certain whatever. So I think that there's no authorizing language on the state side that would allow you to do it, okay, other than what's already in statute. So you may want to check on that to see if I'm even close.
Okay.
But I think I am.
Okay. All right. I appreciate the comments, guys. Thank you.
And the concern I have, and
Yeah.
I'm going to say proudly, Sam, we're leading the way with development and housing in the state, because we've put in the last couple of years, we've put in workforce housing.
yes.
We have, all that stuff going in where the Rockingham Park used to be. There's
Yep.
another 600 units on its way there.
Yep.
So proud to represent District 22 and the housing development. I'm just going to point out, and certainly I understand the developers are carrying a lot of risk when they're building these larger buildings, but the certificate of occupancy, it says that 10 to 25-year relief period, it's beginning upon the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. So the existing developments, would they be eligible for that? Because one of the selling points of that was, oh, hopefully this will lower your property taxes. And obviously, it goes both ways, whether it's more people in the schools, more children in the schools, the police, fire, there's a lot that goes into that. But when that's one of the reasons why I'm bringing that up.
Yep, yep, I understand, and I don't think existing projects would be eligible, but I will follow up on that for you.
All right, I want to go through
Yep.
your list of outstanding legislation. First one on the list is Senate Bill 73, Senator Perkins Quokka. This has got $5 million in it, and I would just as soon wait until after I've heard the budget presentation before I talk to it all. I'm not right now in favor of using UOCAVA funds for that, because the UOCAVA funds are allowing us to keep some of the other things that they do over in the Secretary of State's office out of the general fund. But again, until the budget comes out, if the governor has something in there that would do that, then I wouldn't want to read his words before I acted on that. So the next one on my list is Senate Bill 78. That's Senator Innes's bill. Subdivision regulations.
Mr. Chairman, I believe one of the concerns with that was line 20. It says increase shall be allowed for engineering, administration, or other reasons. And the concern was other reasons could mean any reason.
I had the word similar penciled in on mine. So this is going to need a committee amendment, I believe, to talk about the reasons so that it isn't any reason, but also over on page 2, lines 6 and 10, where I don't think the 10 days is a reasonable amount of time. So we'll put that one on hold also.
Go 20. I'll go 20 days.
Well, 20 days may be reasonable, but we'll certainly, give Senator Innes the chance to weigh in on that. 84, this is Senator Prentice's. There's a couple of things in here, and I haven't talked to Senator Prentice, but some of the people have. There's a possibility of the amendment that was written, which is the one to deal with the language that was put into RSA 1449 that limits how many you can have on and what the makeup of committees. So that discussion with Senator Prentice, I think, needs to happen with me probably, because it could be that we got the bill 74 and just put the revision to 1449, but since that was an initiative of the House, putting it on to any bill may be a death knell for the bill, but I don't know that yet. So that's the reason for no action on that today. The next one is 110. And this is the one that we do have. I guess we've got 2 amendments on it, although I don't see either of them right here. Oh, here we go. We got Fenton's 251S, but I think that was too early.
That was from the hearing.
And,
Yes.
okay. We're calling it my amendment. It's actually an amendment that was conceived by the NHMA, the advocates on both sides of this. I don't know that I have the copy of that either, so who else does not have?
I didn't have one.
So
Thank you.
it's 04686S, you got that?
Mhm.
Senator Perkins Squawka, you got it also?
I have 0486S, yes, yes, thank you.
Okay. And really, what this is an attempt to reach equity. If we remember back to the policy that Manchester had with their fire stations when people were suffering addiction, and the Safe Stations program, and also Nashua came in and had a special appropriations for some of the things that they were doing around the addiction issues, that the people tend to gravitate towards the places where they can get service. And this is an attempt to even that playing field. If you haven't had, a lot of time to review this, you may want to take that and defer action until the next time we meet in executive session. But this is an attempt to get to that compromise. Some of the wording in there I'm not really crazy about, but I think that some of this, it'll work itself out in the administration of it. I also asked about, because of the way the other one was worded, and they were actually looking like they were defining residency, and I didn't want the definition that they were using of residency to conflict with the residency either in voting rights or in motor vehicles or any of the others, that some of that has been taken out, and that for this purpose, and remember, like the university system, when you sign up to go to the university as a student, you're either a resident or you're a non-resident. And the way that the tuition structure at the university system works is if you sign up as a freshman as a non-resident, even though you may have lived here for 3 years, when you get into your junior year, you are not considered a resident even at that point for tuition purposes, unless you've had a year break in your education, and then it gets reset. So it is able to, the law is able to recognize different things, and I think that this, but since you've just gotten the amendment, I would suggest that you not take any action until next week on that. Next one I have on the list is 132, and that was Senator Gannon's. First thing is I question the statute that it went in. It went into RSA 70. RSA 70 is Attorney General, Director of Charitable Trusts, and county attorneys. But there are sections in there that talk about law enforcement manual, which all does come under the Attorney General. I guess, since we're not a home rule state, I don't know how the ordinances could be worded such that they could be backed up with enabling legislation that would allow them to put an ordinance in. So, do any of you senators want to get together and work on that to see what is possible to do with it or not to do with it. Because the way it's written, I can't support it. But Senator?
I think the way it's written, it has some things that need clarification, just, well, obviously if it's written under the right section, but there was some confusion on whether this would allow law enforcement to, it's one thing for police to be authorized by law to go take someone into custody because of a federal detainer or a federal warrant, especially when they're not acting or working alongside federal agents. That's one issue. That's why I kind of, I passed around an amendment from last term that was HB 1266 out of the House. It was passed in the House. It was, I believe it was left to study here in the Senate. But that wouldn't permit police or law enforcement to actually take someone into custody because of a federal an immigration a detainer request. It would not allow that. What that would do is if someone's already in custody, it simply left it the discretion to the police on how to act on a case-by-case basis. It would prohibit a policy that required the police to ignore any such detainer request as a matter of like policy. So I think that, and the goal of that, and I helped draft this when it passed in the House, the goal of that was to really, if you're dealing with an extreme circumstance, allow the police to perhaps do the right thing and value public safety without really giving them any authority or jeopardizing our state sovereignty. I would envision that amendment replacing page 2, lines 18, where it says sanctuary policy. You would just replace that with what was the HB 1266 as amended last term.
All right, so I'm going to mark this down as whole for Senator Abbas to craft an amendment based on the House bill from last year.
There was some conversation to we should clarify that they're not just in the custody, this has to be lawful custody of the state.
Yeah.
So which is implied in that. And then
I was disappointed in the question that I asked about, you know, if the feds issue a warrant, okay, that when they said that a local officer can't serve that warrant if it is an immigration issue. That to me didn't make a lot of sense, but if it's federal law, I can't do anything about it anyway. So we'll let you look at it, and if it's a replace all or a replace part, and anybody that wants to work with Senator Abbas on that, please contact him.
All set, Chairman.
I would likely also be removing paragraph 4, which defines inmate. I don't see the need for that definition there. Just unless anyone disagrees.
Well,
and then on page 3, lines 2, it says any person, including a federal agency, may file such a complaint with. And this is the enforcement side for the Attorney General. I think if it's going to be a state issue, I don't agree with allowing the federal government to file complaints with the state Attorney General against local law enforcement. So I would want to take that out, and we're going to keep it in-house and allow. Is my goal with this. Without, if it doesn't mean you have to support, I'm just throwing it out there as. Any comments would be well received.
I would support those changes. I'm not against the policy as a whole, but I think the changes you're suggesting make sense.
Okay, so that is
that was not a me
pending,
volunteering to
pending,
drafting.
that is pending the new amendment from Senator Abbas. 133, that again changing the date of the primary. Prime sponsor has asked me to hold that. Again, there may be something in the governor's speech that might address that. I have no idea, but 155. I hate playing with these things for the finance stuff. I don't know of any communities out there, and it may just be my naivety, that don't use a system and a system of count numbering that would allow me to pull out school stuff from other budget items and provide that to the individuals, whether they're using Munis or they're using other things.
I know Senator Avon has an amendment that addresses some of the things that people are concerned about, but from what I know, the amendment, but it's not ready, so.
All right.
So you have that information.
Mr.
This-
Chairman, I did listen to this hearing, and it, to quote Yogi Berra, was deja vu all over again.
Yeah.
We've seen it over and over. It seems to be one specific town that has an issue with a few people, and it
This one does have a little bit of a twist, okay?
does.
And the little
but-
bit of a twist is they're talking about single town school districts, okay? But again, the way the accounting numbering system in all of the communities that I deal with, that if I go out, in most cases, it's the middle digits that identify the bigger cost class, okay? So it would identify the schools instead of the public works department, instead of whatever. And that being able to go into and pull out that stuff. Now, when we've dealt with this at other issues, that when we talked about the finance committee and being able to get the data that they wanted for that, we said they either A, have to provide it in the format that the finance committee wants, which is normally a spreadsheet, or B, they have to have somebody at the meeting that can pull the data the way that the finance committee wants. And I look at this, and I'm gonna assign this one to me, and I'm gonna get with at least DRA, because I think that there's, the reports that they do and other things, there may be an easier way to make sure that they have the ability to get the information that they're looking for, and that's, pull the school's finances out for all of this stuff, so. Without any objection, it's gonna be a hold for JPG, okay? But that's the way I'm going. If you disagree with the way I'm going, hopefully, we'll find enough from DRA that, that bill may just disappear, because I think there's already sufficient words out there that do it. 220, Senator Susi has asked for some extra time. We included printed name in the stuff that was in 158. So if there's anything, when you repeat.
Trying to fold that in
If you
is the
repeat anything,
challenge.
you need to
Make
do
it
that.
consistent with what the committee has already voted on. Thank
Certainly,
you.
you know that on the other side of the aisle, there is resistance to expanding absentee voting, and so
I do.
we're not guaranteeing anything, but we will
Nope.
listen. Comments on 220? Any further comments? Take a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second to come out of executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And our business of the day being completed, we are adjourned.